Leeds as former world champions, having been deposed last week by Castleford. It just shows the topsy-turvy nature of Super League this season, and generally in the past few years. And also, for the people who say, oh, the Championship's so unpredictable. Yeah, but so Super League as well. Old sport is unpredictable. What a comeback, again, in the second half from Leeds. Rowan Smith, obviously in the first half he's the worst coach ever, and in the second half he's great again.
Clearly the first half there was an issue because they didn't have a captain and did short kick-offs, but the second half that didn't matter. I think they won it during the period when Harry Newman was in the sin bin. It's not often when a team goes down to 12 men that they'll score 8 unanswered points, and that just seemed to lift everything. Again, just some key performers. Blake Austin's individual performance was as good as I've seen in a Leeds shirt. But then you look at the stats afterwards, and he was involved in absolutely everything. 5 of the tries, but also hell of a lot of running meters, which was great. Jared O'Connor, really impressive. A week that's gone by saying there's extra pressure on you because Cruz Lehman's going to be leaving. Corey Johnson makes a start, had a very good 15 minutes as well. But it was a little bit about Harry Newman, I think. We've got an England team being picked in the next couple of weeks for the international against France. He's trying his hardest to make up for not having been in a World Cup team. Scores 2 tries. The second one was a fantastic breakout effort at the end, but also managed to get sin-binned as well with a little bit of attitude. I don't really mind that. I think the best players have always got something about them, but is it a fine line between abusing a referee and being caught up in the moment and over enthusiastic and passionate about what you're saying?
I think it probably comes with maturity as a player, doesn't it? He's still young, he's still relatively inexperienced. I think he'll probably learn there's a way in which he can express his frustrations that doesn't lead him to being put in the sin bin. I believe he'd added a go in the first half. I don't think that was the first time that had happened in the game, and I suspect that's probably why Liam Moore's patience ran a little bit thin at that stage. Albeit, having said that, I think Harry Newman had a point that for me the first offence was caused by Catalan by putting him in the ruck, and actually I think if Liam had his time again, he may have waved play on because the first offence was by Catalan. They'd got to play the ball away. Yes, it had hit Newman, but if Catalan could pick the ball up and play on, then I think that might have avoided it. That said, that doesn't excuse Harry's reaction, and Liam, particularly with what may have gone on in the first half, obviously felt that that was the opportunity to put him in the sin bin. And as much as anything, because we clearly we don't know what was said, do we? But you can visually see his response, and that he's as bad in some ways from a referee's perspective, because that's visually undermining your authority. So I think with maturity he'll probably learn to deal with those situations differently.
Well, I had a ban after getting sin-binned at St Helens last year for a similar offence.
Yeah, that was worse.
But he's got to learn. He's clearly still in that learning process. £250 fine and no ban. About right, appropriate, what do you think?
Well, it's in line with obviously with the changes that Match Review panel made. To be honest, I think it probably is appropriate for that. In terms of what we've seen of dissent, it wasn't one of the worst examples, and it wasn't anywhere near what we saw last year, where he was protesting with, I think it was Tom Grant who refereed, wasn't he? He was referring something to the video referee, and that was dreadful. That was sort of looked a little bit like football. So yeah, it wasn't as bad as that. And the way that Match Review panel have gone, no game and a fine, it lays down a marker, doesn't it?
I was going to mention football because obviously, would you ever want to referee in the Premier League? Because they just seem to be completely out of control players. And I'm not turning this into all footballers are evil and all rugby players are saints, because we know they aren't. But it does seem that the sport, not just the referees, but the FA, the Premier League, they don't want to give out bans to players for even pushing referees, as we've seen in recent weeks, which is just beyond daft.
Yeah, I don't know what that player got, if that's been sanctioned yet.
I don't think he's been. No, I don't.
But that was terrible. I mean, I don't know where you start with football. It's such a huge issue, but ultimately the governing bodies of that sport have to come together and agree that proper sanctions are going to be given. and finding a player in the Premier League 250 quid
Yeah.
clearly is not the answer, is it? £250,000 maybe, but not
What, a whole
250
week's
quid.
wages?
But for me, in the Premier League, it has to be about putting players on the up in the stand. But what you then have is what we've had in Super League probably last year, where expensive players are being paid to sit in the stand. Club owners are not going to tolerate that. So they've got to find a balance, haven't they? But for me, I saw an example today on social media where there's somebody on a park field, a football park field, having a go at a referee, and somebody's filmed it on their phone or whatever. And once he realises he's being filmed, he stops doing it. Well, he shouldn't be doing it in the first place, should he? No. And whether football need to go down the route of cameras like Rugby League have done in the National Conference League and the community game, Rugby League's been really proactive in that, in rolling out this season lots of sort of referee cameras. Now, clearly, you're not going to do that in the Premier League, but at community level in football, I think that could be the way to go.
There's a great documentary where the former RFL president, Mr. Tony Adams, is having great discussions with David Ellery in the past. It's worth seeking out.
But that's an important one, because that was a test, I think, or it was a one-off game, wasn't it, where they put a microphone on the referee. Now, the referees have microphones on them in the Premier League, but it's not broadcast. And I think if you did broadcast it, then that might be the reason for the FA to then step in and take action, because you can't have that going out.
What about a sin bin, though? Does football need to introduce a sin bin? Because, again, if you were to lose a player for 10 minutes, that might have in a game where you could only have one goal that decides it, that could be quite significant.
And maybe that might be the answer, because you're not putting somebody in the back of the stand for a number of weeks, are you? But you're removing a player for a period of time. So yeah, that should be something they should look at.
So viewing figures for Channel 4, we believe, were 400,000 for that game, which again, International Football Weekend, you're probably going to pick up some neutrals. And I think that's what came over, that if this is your first time watching the sport, there was enough there that you'd come back and watch it again. As you say, how do you measure quality? I think everybody that watched that was captivated. There was controversy about should Mitchell Pearce's try have been allowed. I don't know if we saw enough angles to have a view on that in real time in the ground. Looked as though, and I think even Sam Tompkins said it at half time, that had it been given the other way, very few people would have complained. But you had the tackle by Tetivano on Mike McMeekin, which was replayed loads of times on social media, and you ended with a length of the field try. It virtually it felt like this is a great advert for what we are.
Agree, and it had the weather, didn't it? It had the sunshine, which I think always helps. It does help.
And that lunch, it's funny talking to some of the players afterwards. They felt different playing at a lunchtime on a Saturday.
Yeah.
It's not the same as being on a wet ground on a Friday night. With under lights that probably aren't to specification. It felt like more of an occasion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in terms of the Pierce try, it was a difficult decision. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. And I think without the live call, it probably becomes even more difficult.
Yeah.
Because there's no direction from the on-field. It went up as no try.
So,
for me, I think given it was a difficult decision, and you could probably argue the merits either way. Having said that, I was more on the side of no try than try, and given the live call of no try, I think I would imagine in the group review today they would have obviously discussed that, and they would have they've had to come to a conclusion whether it was right or wrong. I would have suggested that staying with the live call of no try would have probably been the right outcome, because you're allowed to make a second movement, but in the policy it talks about if the momentum of the tackle takes him into the in-goal area anyway, then that second movement becomes irrelevant. Well, his body never ended up in the in-goal area. It was always in the field of play. Now, you might argue that's because he had a tackler on him pulling him back, and the second movement was created by momentum. But for me, it's just all too technical. For me, it was no try.
Liam Moram's got the moment of the match, didn't he, for having got Rhyse Martin's goal kicking.
Yes, which again tells you the humour.
Should he get a £250 fine for that? That's abusing a player.
It's brilliant, because again it shows that we do have that level of humour and humanity between the match officials and the players. And again, Rhyse Martin's reaction when he kicked a goal, having missed 5 on the trot, which I don't think he's ever done in his career before.
I mean, he kicked 700 in a row last
year. And again, I think there are some coaches that might have had a word with Harry Newman about his try celebrations, because there's always a chance you're going to drop the ball and make yourself look foolish. But in the context of that game and that time and the crowd, it all seemed to be part of that entertainment principle.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I saw somebody's tweet about that comment that Liam had made to Rhyse, and that's somebody that just doesn't understand refereeing, that doesn't understand game management. That's just a light-hearted remark.
yeah.
You wouldn't say that if it was, you wouldn't be taking the mick if they were 50-0 down or something.
No, I think you've got to try and, as a referee, put across a bit of personality, and hopefully that's met with a good response either way. You pick your moments and you pick your players.
Yeah. So I thought that was great. Everything about it, obviously, unless you're, Catalan wanting to defend your unbeaten record. But I thought Steve McNamara was brilliant in the press conference. They had 3 really significant players who suffered injuries. I thought particularly Ben Garcia doesn't get the credit he deserves, but his post-contact meters are absolutely unbelievable. And for him to go off, as well as Tyrone May in particular, was having a real influence on the game. Gudemon never really got started. I think he could have said, "Oh, we had 3 players, our bench was down to 1," and but he didn't. He was honest and said, the speed of the ruck hurt us in the second half, and that's why we lost. So for me, there were really no losers, and the television audience were the biggest winners.
I'm indebted to Brian Smith, of course, and I love Ron Smith. He's great. He gives people plenty of stories, such as Jared O'Connor playing for the name on the front of his shirt rather than the back of it. And I'd already done a joke downstairs, which I can't repeat because I won't get the same reaction. But it was Leeds Building Society. Was the punchline. But at least it...
you did. You did.
Yeah.
Your reaction.
It was a pointed remark, though, wasn't it? I picked up on that. Yeah, it was a pointed remark, that one.
I think...
It's all about the team.
I don't know who is advising Cruz Liam, and I don't know where he'll eventually end up. And it may well be that he feels personally he's in a better place because of all this. But where we sit at the moment, you would imagine if he was watching on his sofa on Saturday, he might be ringing his agent going, I think we could have made a mistake.